In a modest log cabin, Jack Brannigan grew up alongside a young bobcat he named Willow, their lives deeply rooted in the wilderness. Theirs was a bond forged in silence, a language understood between the world of man and the heart of the wild. From her, he learned that wildness isn't something to be owned, but to be honored. Willow eventually gave him the ultimate trust, revealing her newborn kittens and making his home their sanctuary. Decades later, Jack's world was threatened when he overheard that developers planned to bulldoze the forest for a 170-unit housing complex. Every memory, every den, every familiar trail was about to be erased. Faced with an impossible choice, Jack knew he had to act. What he did next not only stunned his community, but became a turning point for an entire bobcat species. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Jack Brannigan's earliest memories were stitched together from the textures and sounds of the old log cabin where he grew up. The cabin stood alone at the edge of a sea of maple and hickory trees, cradled by rolling hills and clear, cold streams that cut through the landscape like ribbons of glass. The wild was not a distant idea to him, but a present, pulsing reality. Bees hummed along the porch in summer, and in winter the wind whistled through the chinks in the log walls. His mother kept the fire bright, and his father taught him the quiet craft of listening. To listen not only to the human voices, but to the subtle murmur of leaves, the crunch of deer hooves in snow, the warning bark of a fox. When he was still a boy with dirt-stained knees and pockets full of pebbles, a chance encounter would anchor his heart to the place forever. One spring morning, he found a bobcat kitten curled up under a bramble, trembling and alone. Her eyes, enormous and flecked with gold, were wide with uncertainty. Jack had been taught to respect wildness, yet the vulnerability of the creature stirred something protective and ancient inside him. He stood still, knowing that sudden movement might frighten her. After a while, when no mother appeared, he eased closer. The kitten hissed, flattened her ears, and lifted her tiny paws in a display of courage. Jack whispered soothingly and withdrew just far enough to give her space. When dusk fell and the mother still had not returned, Jack and his father decided to make a place for her on the back porch, shielding her from the cold. They did not domesticate her, but offered her shelter, fresh meat, and time to heal. In those evenings, as the moon rose above the black silhouettes of the pines, the boy would sit nearby, talking softly about everything and nothing, sharing the simple wonders of his days. The bobcat, whom Jack quietly began calling Willow after the tree that bent over the stream behind the house, listened, eyes half closed, her tail slowly flicking. The bond was tentative, respectful, and built on trust. Jack learned the shapes of her moods, how her pupils widened in alarm at sudden noises, how her whiskers bristled when she was curious, and how she purred a low, throaty rumble when she felt safe. He also learned that wild things do not belong to anyone. Willow taught him patience and humility, disappearing into the underbrush for days at a time, only to return with small scratches from her adventures. As he grew older and strong, so did she. His earliest lessons were not from books, but from the rhythmic cycles of the forest and from the silent language between a boy and a bobcat. The seasons marked the passing of years, each one leaving its own signature on Jack's life and on Willow's. Autumn turned the hills into bursts of color that dazzled the eyes, and he and Willow would walk among fallen leaves, the crunch under their boots and paws like music. Winter brought deep snow that softened the world into whispers, and Willow's coat thickened, blending her into the pale landscape. Jack marveled at her ability to vanish right before his eyes, even when he knew she stood just a few feet away. In spring, the stream swelled, and the air filled with the scent of thawing earth. He often followed her to her favorite perch above a small waterfall where she would sit, perfectly still, as if contemplating the whole of her realm. These moments etched themselves into Jack's heart. As he approached his teenage years, he realized that Willow was not a pet. She was a free spirit who chose to spend time with him. When the first hints of adulthood touched him, the desire to explore distant horizons pulled at his mind. He left for school in town, occasionally traveling with his father to markets and meetings, but Willow remained a constant presence in his thoughts. The Bobcats' wanderings took her deeper into the wilderness, and she stayed away longer each time. One early summer, after being gone for weeks, she returned with soft mews that were not her own. Hidden among her shadowed fur were 3 kittens, their eyes still sealed against the light. Willow had chosen to bring new life near Jack's home, trusting that the place where she had been given care as a kitten would also be safe for her own young. Jack watched from a respectful distance as she cleaned them, nursed them, and began to teach them the way of the wild. It was a profound honor he could barely articulate. Seeing her vulnerability and strength all at once, he understood that what he offered the Bobcat was not a cage or a leash, but a sanctuary. He built a small den under an outcropping near the stream, carrying stones and branches to shield them from the elements. He knew the kittens would grow up hearing his voice and the rustle of his boots, but he also knew he must allow them to remain untamed. His respect for Willow deepened. She had come to him not because she needed to be owned, but because she chose to trust him again. Together, they navigated the boundaries between 2 worlds, hers of instinct and wilderness, his of human stories and responsibilities. And in doing so, they created a harmony that transcended their differences. Years later, on an afternoon heavy with summer heat and the distant buzz of cicadas, Jack's life shifted on a single overheard conversation. He had become a man by then, sturdy and weathered from building fences and chopping firewood, with eyes that still lit up when he spoke of the forest. He walked into town to buy supplies, leaving behind the cabin that had been both his home and a sanctuary for Willow and her offspring. As he was loading sacks of flour into the back of his truck, he caught snippets of a heated discussion between 2 men leaning against a gleaming sedan. They talked about a developer from the city, someone with deep pockets and grand plans. There was mention of a proposal to transform the land just beyond Jack's family's property, an untouched stretch of forest interlaced with animal trails, into a 170-unit townhouse complex. The words hung in the humid air like a threat. Jack felt a cold coil tighten in his stomach. He knew that forest intimately, knew which maple trees towered above others, which rocks warmed the Bobcats on winter mornings. He knew where Willow had hidden her kittens, where deer sought refuge from hunters, and where the streams bent their way around clusters of moss. The thought of bulldozers crushing saplings and concrete replacing the rich, dark soil ignited a fierce protectiveness. He approached the men quietly, asking for details. They shrugged, oblivious to the life that pulsed in the land they aimed to clear. That night, Jack sat on the porch, the hum of crickets weaving through his thoughts. He looked toward the silhouette of the mountains where bobcats roamed. Willow, older now and leaner, slipped through the edge of the trees and paused as if sensing his turmoil. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze, he felt the weight of responsibility descend. He knew he could not allow that forest to be destroyed. Every memory of Willow and her kittens would be wiped away by heavy machinery. As the stars pricked the night sky, He made his decision. With whatever savings he had, and with the courage that had come from growing up alongside a predator, he would purchase the land before the developer could sign the contract. The next morning, Jack went to the courthouse. He met with landowners, made phone calls, and signed papers with a hand that trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the enormity of the task. In the end, he managed to secure 55 acres of prime habitat. He knew it was only a fraction of what was threatened, but it was a start. "There's no way I'd let a developer get his hands on this land," he told the county clerk, his voice steady. "Sometimes it takes people like us to stand up for what's left." Word of his actions spread like wildfire through the small towns and long stretches of farmland. Some thought him foolish for spending every penny to save trees and animals. Others recognized the depth of his commitment and felt inspired. Jack's bold purchase caught the attention of those who had long been watching the slow encroachment of development on wild spaces. Among them was the Nature Conservancy, an organization dedicated to preserving habitats and biodiversity. Representatives visited Jack at his cabin, stepping onto the porch where Willow had once curled beneath his chair. They talked of a larger vision, something monumental in scope, yet grounded in the simple act of allowing animals to move freely and safely. A corridor connecting the dense forests of the highlands to the ridges of the Kittatinny, spanning nearly 9,000 acres. It would be called Bobcat Alley. The name thrilled Jack. It recognized not just the animal he loved, but the entire community of creatures that would benefit. Bears, foxes, owls, and coyotes, each requiring space to find mates, hunting grounds, and shelter. The representatives spoke of linking existing protected parcels of land with bridges over highways, tunnels under roads, and easements across private properties. This would ensure that wildlife could travel without dodging cars or encountering high fences. Jack listened, picturing in his mind the sinuous paths Willow's descendants might follow through the landscape. He thought about the kittens that would learn to hunt among the ferns, the male bobcats that would roam widely in search of territories, and the females that would need safe dens for their young. He offered his 55 acres as a keystone, his contribution a literal and symbolic cornerstone of the project. Together, they walked through the forest, mapping out where a bridge might arch over a 2-lane highway or where a culvert could be widened beneath a road. Engineers, ecologists, and volunteers began working, marking trees with ribbons and plotting routes that considered not only human logistics, but animal behavior. Jack's nights were filled with planning meetings in town halls and in barns, with diagrams laid out across wooden tables. Often he would glance at the door, half expecting Willow to slink in and take her place beside him. Though she did not, her presence was felt in every decision he made. The first segments of Bobcat Alley took shape. A small bridge arched over a narrow highway, its edges planted with native shrubs so that animals would not feel exposed. Underneath a busier road, a culvert was expanded into a tunnel with natural flooring so that soft paws would not be startled by echoing man-made sounds. Signs were erected along roadsides to alert drivers to the invisible passageways beneath. Each successful connection was celebrated quietly among those who understood what was truly being built, a lifeline across a fragmented landscape. As construction progressed, Jack often found himself back in the very places where he had once played as a boy. He would stand in a clearing and watch as cranes lowered sections of prefabricated bridge beams into place, flanked by teams of workers in hard hats and reflective vests. He admired the blend of human ingenuity and respect for nature, how engineers designed structures that looked like rocky outcroppings from above or were covered in soil and planted with wildflowers to integrate seamlessly into the environment. Children from nearby towns came to plant saplings along the newly preserved banks of streams. Elderly farmers who had previously been skeptical now asked what more they could do to help. The corridor grew not just in acreage but in spirit. Jack learned about land trusts, easements, and funding mechanisms that allowed small parcels to be protected and connected like puzzle pieces. He sat at kitchen tables with neighbors, sipping coffee and explaining how their land could continue to support their cows while also providing a safe passage for bobcats. Some required only reassurance. Others needed time to let the idea settle. When a landowner agreed to place an easement on their property, Jack would drive home with the paper signed and tears of gratitude misting his eyes. He had not planned to become a negotiator or a fundraiser, yet he embraced this new role because the stakes were so tangible. Every acre secured meant another safe path for a bobcat. In the middle of these busy months, he still found moments of quiet. He would set down his paperwork, slip into the forest, and sit on the mossy bank of the stream. Occasionally, he caught sight of a slender, spotted form weaving through the undergrowth. Once he glimpsed one of Willow's daughters, distinguished by a notch in her ear, leading two nearly grown kittens across a patch of ferns. They paused, looked directly at him without fear, and then melted into the forest like smoke. He felt an ache of pride and relief. The corridor was working. It was not just an idea, it was already saving lives. Bobcats that might have been hit by cars were instead vanishing into tunnels. Deer that might have been forced into neighborhoods were moving deeper into protected woods. Foxes and raccoons discovered new hunting grounds. The first time a mother bear and her cubs were captured on a trail camera using the overpass, the whole team gathered around the flickering screen and cheered. Each photo became a testament to the power of human collaboration when harnessed for good. The summer Jack turned 50, the project reached a milestone. The original 55 acres had grown into a protected network of over 10,000 acres when combined with adjacent state, county, and private lands. Bridges spanned highways, tunnels meandered under back roads, and even homeowners had installed small bobcat stairs, low ramps over fences, to allow wildlife to pass through. Visitors who drove through the region often missed these discreet structures, seeing only uninterrupted forest. That invisibility was by design. The corridor was meant to belong to the animals first. One cool September morning, Jack walked along a path he had known since childhood. The sunlight filtered through maple leaves beginning to blush red. His boots pressed into the damp earth, and his breath hung in the crisp air. He reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked a glade where he had often seen Willow lying in the sun. He settled in, unsure if he would be rewarded with a sighting. For a long time, nothing stirred except the slow fall of leaves. Then, as if conjured by memory, a large bobcat emerged from the ferns on the far side of the glade. Her coat was sleek, her muscles rippling beneath the pattern of spots. Jack recognized in her gait the grace and power that had always mesmerized him. She paused mid-step, lifted her head, and sniffed the air. She did not see him. Her attention was focused on a distant sound. Then she turned and moved across the clearing, her paws silent on the forest floor. At the edge of the glade, she stopped, glanced back at the path she had come, and then leaped with fluid ease onto the boulders lining the overpass. Jack's heart pounded. He watched as she crossed the bridge that existed because he had spent his savings, because volunteers had given their weekends, because engineers had believed in designing for paws rather than tires. She never knew the danger that lay beneath the concrete, never saw the traffic whizzing by below. To her, it was just a continuation of her domain. Tears blurred Jack's vision. In the Bobcat's passage, he saw Willow's ghost trailing behind her, The kitten he had sheltered as a boy now multiplied into generations roaming freely. He felt the weight of the years between then and now and understood that his life had been guiding him to this moment. He sat there long after she disappeared, the memory of her tail flicking at the edge of his sight like a prayer. The story of Bobcat Alley rippled beyond the mountain ridges and local newsletters. People who lived hundreds of miles away heard about the man who refused to let developers erase his memories and the wild creatures who shared his land. Schools invited Jack to speak to students about conservation. Television crews set up cameras on the porch where Willow had once curled up. Yet when journalists tried to make him the sole hero of the story, he always redirected credit. He talked about his parents, who taught him to respect the land, about Willow, whose trust had opened his eyes to the needs of wild animals, about the neighbors who signed easements, the volunteers who planted trees, and the donors who funded bridges. This was never about one person, he said more than once. It's about all of us seeing that we're part of something bigger. The Nature Conservancy, buoyed by the success of the initial phases, announced a fundraising campaign to secure the remaining parcels and enhance the corridor. They aimed to raise $60 million to purchase additional land and support long-term management. Jack lent his voice to the effort. He traveled to conferences in cities where skyscrapers dwarfed trees, speaking to executives about why the survival of a nocturnal cat mattered. He told stories about sitting quietly with Willow, about the day he overheard that fateful conversation in town, about watching a bobcat cross the bridge. He explained how animals need space to roam to maintain genetic diversity, and how corridors like Bobcat Alley can connect populations that would otherwise be isolated. He did not lecture. He told stories. In those stories lay the power to move hearts. People who had never seen a bobcat in the wild wrote checks, knowing they were helping something precious persist. Schools held bake sales and art auctions. Hikers donated gear. A company that made highway signs designed new wildlife crossing alerts at cost. The movement to complete Bobcat Alley became a tapestry of contributions from across the country. As the years continued, Bobcat Alley flourished into an enduring legacy. The mosaic of protected lands expanded, weaving through farms, forests, and mountains like a living ribbon. Researchers set up motion-activated cameras and captured images of coyotes, foxes, owls, and yes, dozens of bobcats using the passages he had helped create. They recorded data that showed a decrease in roadkill incidents and an increase in genetic diversity among bobcat populations. School children visited the trails accompanied by guides who spoke in hushed tones, pointing to scat and tracks, and telling them that somewhere in the dappled shade, a shy predator was listening. Jack often joined these groups, walking slightly behind, watching their eyes widen as they learned to see their environment in a new way. In his late 60s, with silver hair and laugh lines etched deeply into his face, Jack still woke before dawn, making coffee and stepping out onto his porch to smell the wet air and listen for the distant cries of owls. Sometimes he would catch sight of a bobcat at the edge of the trees, a fleeting silhouette dissolving like mist. Each time he felt the same surge of wonder that had filled him as a boy. He would recall the small, trembling kitten under the bramble, the decision to spend all he had, the bridges and tunnels that now braided the landscape together. He never forgot the lesson Willow had taught him, that giving space to wildness enriches human life as well. Toward the end of his life, when someone asked him what he considered his greatest achievement, he did not mention the speeches he had given or the acres he had saved. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "Watching a bobcat cross a bridge and knowing she had no idea a human had anything to do with it." In that statement was the distilled essence of his philosophy. The greatest gift humans can give to the wild is the freedom to exist without us. American culture celebrated pioneers and rugged individualists. Yet Jack saw that true bravery lay not in conquering nature, but in preserving it. The story of Bobcat Alley entered folklore as a modern testament to the power of one person's love for an animal blossoming into a movement that saved thousands. Parents told their children the tale before bed, teachers incorporated it into lessons about ecology, and artists painted murals of bobcats leaping across highways. In time, the wildcats themselves became symbols of resilience and grace. Long after Jack's voice had quieted, the purr of a bobcat could be heard in the forests of New Jersey, and in the hearts of those who followed, a whisper echoed. Sometimes it takes people like us to stand up for what's left.